The ringing of the church bell shattered the evening silence as Willow O'Connor slipped through the back door of Dawson Creek's town hall, her heart pounding against her ribcage like a wild Mustang. The spring of 1875 had brought more than just wildflowers to the Montana Territory. It had brought the town's most anticipated event, the Spring Bride's Dance. For Willow, it brought only dread. Tugging nervously at her borrowed gown, a simple cornflower blue dress that had seen better days, Willow positioned herself in the darkest corner of the hall. The soft glow of oil lamps and scattered candles cast dancing shadows across the wooden floor, providing her just enough darkness to remain unnoticed, just as she preferred it. At 22, Willow was considered by most to be firmly on the shelf. An orphan since 16, she'd spent years working as the town's seamstress, living in the small room above her shop, keeping to herself and her needlework. She hadn't planned to attend tonight at all, but Mrs. Henderson, the kindly widow who owned the general store, had insisted. "Every eligible young woman should attend," she'd said, pressing the dress into Willow's reluctant hands. "You spend too much time alone with your threads and needles." Now, as the fiddles struck up a lively tune and couples began to swirl across the floor, Willow pressed herself deeper into the shadows. She wasn't here to dance. She was here merely to appease Mrs. Henderson, who stood across the room, beaming with satisfaction at having dragged Willow out of her solitude. The hall was transformed for the occasion. Paper flowers and ribbons hung from the rafters, and tables laden with pies and punch lined one wall. Most striking of all were the women, at least a dozen, who stood nervously along the opposite wall, each wearing their finest, each hoping to catch a husband before the night was through. The tradition was simple. Any unmarried woman attending the Spring Bride's Dance was fair game for courting. Any bachelor who asked a woman to dance was expressing interest in potential marriage. 3 dances with the same partner was practically an engagement. It was efficient, if not romantic, in a territory where women were scarce and loneliness abundant. Willow had no interest in such arrangements. After losing her parents to typhoid and watching her younger sister waste away the following winter, she had learned that attachments only led to heartbreak. Better to remain alone than to love and lose again. The door swung open, and a hush fell over the crowd as several cowboys sauntered in, trail dust still clinging to their boots. They'd clearly come straight from a cattle drive, their faces weathered and tired but eager for female company after months on the lonely trail. Willow recognized most of them local ranch hands and drifters who passed through Dawson Creek regularly. But one man caught her attention. Tall and broad-shouldered, he stood slightly apart from the others, his eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity that made Willow shrink further into her corner. "That's Yates Donovan," whispered a woman nearby to her friend. "Heard he just bought the old Miller Ranch, paid cash money too." "Reckon he's looking for a wife to help run it," her companion replied with a meaningful look. Willow studied him from her hiding place. Unlike the other men, who were already sidling up to the row of hopeful brides, Yates Donovan seemed in no hurry. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and though his clothes were simple, a clean white shirt and dark trousers, they fit him well. He carried himself with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. As the music swelled again, men began to approach the line of women, bowing and extending hands. Some women smiled eagerly, others feigned reluctance despite their obvious pleasure. Within minutes, the floor was filled with whirling couples. Willow exhaled slowly, relieved to be overlooked in her shadowy corner. She would stay another hour, perhaps sample some of Mrs. Henderson's apple pie, and then slip away unnoticed. Her plan was perfect until she felt someone's gaze upon her. Looking up, she found herself staring directly into the deep blue eyes of Yates Donovan. He stood just a few feet away, studying her with undisguised interest. Willow froze, her heart resuming its wild pounding. "You're hiding," he said simply, his voice low and rich like good bourbon. "I'm observing," Willow corrected, finding her voice despite her surprise. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Most women come to dance, not observe. I'm not most women. His smile widened, revealing a dimple in his left cheek. No, I don't imagine you are. The fiddle reached the end of its tune and the dancers paused, awaiting the next. Yates extended his hand toward Willow, his eyes never leaving hers. Would you do me the honor? He asked. Willow stared at his outstretched hand, panic rising in her throat. I don't dance, she managed. Everyone can dance, he countered. Some just haven't found the right partner. Before Willow could refuse again, Mrs. Henderson appeared beside them, her round face flushed with excitement. Willow O'Connor, don't you dare refuse this fine gentleman, she scolded good-naturedly. Mr. Donovan, she's the finest seamstress in 3 territories. Makes the most beautiful wedding dresses you've ever seen, though she's never made one for herself. The widow winked unsubtly. Willow felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mrs. Henderson, but Yates was already reaching for her hand, his warm fingers closing around hers with gentle firmness. A seamstress. Now I'm doubly intrigued. Before she knew what was happening, Willow found herself being led onto the dance floor as the musicians struck up a waltz. Her feet moved clumsily at first, but Yates guided her with surprising grace for a man of his size. Relax, he murmured, his hand steady at her waist. Just follow my lead. Gradually, Willow's tension eased as they moved together across the floor. She was acutely aware of the stares from around the room, the seamstress who hid from society, now dancing with the most eligible newcomer in town. Why me? She asked suddenly, unable to contain her curiosity. There are a dozen women here who would be thrilled to dance with you. Yates looked down at her, his expression thoughtful. Maybe I prefer a woman who isn't trying to catch a husband. How do you know I'm not? He chuckled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. You were hiding in the shadows instead of standing in the bride's line. Either you're not interested or you have a unique strategy. Despite herself, Willow smiled. Not a strategy, just an aversion to being paraded like cattle at auction. Fair enough. He guided her through a turn, his movements surprisingly nimble. So tell me about yourself, Miss O'Connor. Besides being a reluctant dancer and a talented seamstress, Willow hesitated. She wasn't accustomed to talking about herself. There's not much to tell. I've lived in Dawson Creek for 6 years. I keep to myself, do my work. Family? None. The word came out sharper than she intended. Yates nodded, accepting her answer without pressing. I lost mine too. Parents to fever when I was 14, brother to the war. The simple statement, delivered without self-pity, caught Willow off guard. There was something in his understanding that made her add, my parents died of typhoid when I was 16, my sister the following winter. I'm sorry, he said, and unlike when others spoke those words, Willow believed he truly meant it. The dance ended and couples around them broke apart, but Yates kept hold of her hand. Another? He asked as the fiddles began again. Common sense told Willow to decline, to retreat to her corner, but something in his steady gaze made her nod. One more dance couldn't hurt. But one dance turned into 2 and 2 into 3 until Willow lost count. They spoke of simple things, the spring weather, his new ranch, her work. When they tired of dancing, he brought her punch and introduced her to his foreman, a grizzled man named Charlie who tipped his hat respectfully to Willow. As the evening wore on, Willow found herself relaxing in Yates's company. There was something comforting about his straightforward manner and quiet confidence. He didn't flirt outrageously like some men, nor did he treat her like a fragile flower. Instead, he spoke to her as an equal, listening intently to her responses, laughing genuinely at her dry observations. By the time the final dance was called, the talk of the town hall was not the 3 engagements that had been all but formalized that evening, but the mysterious connection between the reclusive seamstress and the new rancher. May I see you home? Yates asked as the musicians packed away their instruments. Willow hesitated only briefly before nodding. The night air was cool as they stepped outside, the stars brilliant in the clear Montana sky. Her shop was just a short walk from the town hall on the edge of Dawson Creek's Main Street. "I enjoyed tonight," Yates said as they walked, his strides shortened to match her pace. "More than I expected to." "As did I," Willow admitted, "though I hadn't planned on dancing at all." "I'm glad you changed your mind." He glanced down at her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I'd like to call on you, Willow, properly." They had reached her shop, a small building with living quarters above. Willow paused, her hand on the railing of the steps leading to her door. "Mr. Donovan, Yates, please." Yates. His name felt strange on her lips. "I'm not looking for a husband," he nodded slowly. "I understand, but I'm not proposing marriage, just a visit. Perhaps you could show me your work. I've been told it's exceptional." Willow studied him, searching for signs of insincerity but finding none. "Sunday afternoon," she said finally. "I'm closed for business then, but I'll receive visitors." A smile spread across his face, warm and genuine. "Sunday it is." He took her hand and with old-world formality pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Miss O'Connor." Willow watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the darkness, and wondered what she had just set in motion. Sunday arrived clear and bright, and Willow found herself fussing over her appearance more than usual. She chose a simple dress of forest green, her best work, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Her auburn hair, usually bound tightly at the nape of her neck, she arranged in a softer style with a few tendrils framing her face. As the town church bells struck 2, there was a knock at her shop door. Taking a deep breath, Willow opened it to find Yates standing there, hat in hand, looking as nervous as she felt. He held a small bouquet of wildflowers. "These grow near my property," he explained, holding them out to her. "Thought you might like them." Touched by the simple gesture, Willow accepted them with a smile. "They're lovely. Please come in." She led him into her shop, suddenly seeing it through his eyes, the bolts of fabric neatly arranged by color, the display of ribbons and lace, the half-finished wedding dress on the dressmaker's dummy in the corner. "This is beautiful work," Yates said, running a finger along the intricate beadwork on the bodice of the wedding gown. "You're truly gifted. Thank you." Willow moved to arrange the flowers in a jar of water. "Would you like some tea?" They settled at the small table where Willow usually met with clients, sipping tea and talking easily. Yates told her about his plans for the ranch, breeding horses alongside the cattle operation, expanding the house that came with the property. "It needs a woman's touch," he admitted. "Right now it's functional, but hardly a home. Most bachelor establishments are the same," Willow replied diplomatically. "And yours?" Yates asked, glancing toward the stairs that led to her living quarters. "Is it just functional, or have you made it a home?" The question was innocent enough, but Willow felt a flutter of unease. "A bit of both, I suppose. I keep busy with work, so there's little time for decorating. May I see it sometime?" At her startled look, he added hastily, "With a chaperone present, of course." "I'm simply curious about the place you call home." Willow hesitated, then nodded. "Perhaps. Another time." Their conversation drifted to books they'd read, places they'd seen. Yates had traveled extensively before settling in Montana, working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, spending a year in California during the gold rush. "Never found gold," he said with a wry smile, "but I learned what I didn't want: a life spent chasing dreams that vanish like smoke." "And what do you want?" Willow asked, genuinely curious, his eyes blue as the summer sky held her steadily. "Land of my own, work that means something. Eventually, a family." He paused. "What about you? What does Willow O'Connor want from life?" It was a question she rarely asked herself. "Security," she said after a moment's thought. "Independence. Not love, family." Willow looked away, her fingers tightening around her teacup. "I had a family, they're gone now." Yates reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "That doesn't mean you can't have another." The touch sent a jolt through Willow and she withdrew her hand. "It's getting late," she said, rising from her chair. "I have work to prepare for tomorrow." Though disappointment flickered in his eyes, Yates nodded and stood. "Of course. Thank you for the tea and conversation." I enjoyed both immensely. At the door, he paused. There's a social at the church next Saturday. Would you consider attending with me? Willow should have refused. The sensible part of her, the part that had kept her safe and independent for years, urged her to decline. But another part, a part she thought long dormant, whispered that perhaps it was time to step out of the shadows. Yes, she found herself saying, I'd like that. His smile could have lit up the darkest night. I'll call for you at 6. Over the following weeks, Yates became a regular fixture in Willow's carefully ordered life. He escorted her to the church social, where they sat together eating Mrs. Peterson's famous fried chicken while townsfolk pretended not to stare. He appeared at her shop with lunch when she was too busy to break for a meal. Once he brought her a length of silk he'd ordered from Denver, just because its shade of blue reminded him of her eyes. Gradually, Willow found her defenses crumbling. She began to look forward to his visits, to the sound of his laughter, to the way he listened as if her words were precious. She found herself sharing stories of her childhood, of her parents and sister, memories she had kept locked away for years. One evening in late June, Yates invited her to dinner at his ranch. Charlie's wife will be there to ensure your reputation remains intact, he assured her with a teasing smile. And I want to show you the improvements I've made to the house. Willow agreed, and on Saturday evening, Yates arrived with a buggy to transport her the 5 miles to his property. The Miller Ranch now, the Donovan Ranch, sprawled across a picturesque valley, with a creek running through it and mountains rising in the distance. The house itself was a substantial 2-story structure, recently painted white with green shutters. It's beautiful, Willow said as they approached. It's getting there, Yates replied, his pride evident. Wait until you see inside. Charlie's wife, Martha, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s, greeted them at the door. About time he brought you out here, she said, taking Willow's shawl. Been talking about you non-stop since that dance. Martha, Yates warned, but the older woman just laughed. No point denying it, boss. Now come along, Miss O'Connor, and let me show you around while he fusses over the wine. Martha led Willow through the house, pointing out the improvements. Yates had made new wallpaper in the parlor, refinished floors, a piano he'd had shipped from St. Louis. Says he can't play a note, Martha confided, but thought a proper home should have won. The tour ended in the dining room, where the table was set with fine china and crystal that gleamed in the lamplight. Fresh flowers, the same wildflowers Yates had brought her that first Sunday, adorned the center of the table. Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Martha serving a delicious meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh vegetables from the kitchen garden. Yates kept the conversation flowing easily, and even Martha's occasional knowing looks couldn't dampen Willow's enjoyment. After the meal, Martha tactfully withdrew to the kitchen, leaving Yates and Willow alone in the parlor. Through the open windows came the sound of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. I have something for you, Yates said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small carved wooden box and handed it to Willow. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a wildflower. I had it made in Helena, Yates explained. The silversmith there is quite talented. It's exquisite, Willow whispered, touching the petals gently, but I can't accept such an expensive gift. You can, Yates insisted. It's a token of my affection, nothing more, unless, he moved closer, taking her hands in his. Unless you'll consider it a promise. Willow, these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. I know it's soon, perhaps too soon, but I've fallen in love with you. Willow's breath caught in her throat. She had known this was coming, had felt it building between them, but hearing the words spoken aloud made it real in a way that terrified her. Yates, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. I know you've built walls around your heart. I understand why. Just know that I'm patient and I'll wait until you're ready. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers up her arm. Keep the brooch, regardless. It was made for you. That night, as Martha chaperoned from a discreet distance, Yates walked Willow around the property by moonlight, showing her the stables, the new foals, the vegetable garden he'd started. "One day I hope to show you all this as your home," he said softly. "But for now I'm content just to have you here." The ride back to town was quiet, both lost in thought. At her door, Yates helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist. "May I call on you tomorrow?" Willow nodded, unable to deny the longing she felt for his company. "I'd like that." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. It was brief, chaste even, but it left Willow breathless. "Good night, Willow," he whispered against her lips. "Good night, Yates." She watched him drive away, her fingers touching her lips where his had been, the silver brooch a weight in her pocket that matched the heaviness in her heart. July brought scorching heat and the threat of drought. Ranchers worried over their cattle, and farmers watched the sky anxiously for rain clouds that never appeared. Yates was busy with ranch work, often returning to town dusty and exhausted, but he never failed to visit Willow when he came in for supplies. One particularly hot afternoon, as Willow worked on alterations for Mrs. Mayer's new dress, the sky suddenly darkened. Looking up, she saw not rain clouds but an ominous wall of brown on the horizon. "Fire," she whispered, dread filling her chest. Within minutes, the town was in chaos. Men on horseback galloped through, shouting warnings. The fire was spreading rapidly across the drought-stricken grassland, headed straight for Dawson Creek. Willow quickly packed her most valuable possessions, her sewing machine, a box of her parents' mementos, the silver brooch from Yates, and carried them to the town square, where wagons were being loaded with women, children, and essential items. "Miss O'Connor." Sheriff Taylor called, helping her load her sewing machine. "Get on the next wagon, they're heading for the river, should be safe there." "What about the men?" she asked, scanning the crowd for a familiar tall figure, gone to dig fire breaks and wet down the buildings. The Donovan ranch hands arrived just in time. "They're out fighting it now." Willow's heart squeezed painfully. The fire was coming from the direction of Yates's ranch. Had it already reached his property? Was he safe? As she hesitated, a familiar voice called her name. Turning, she saw Charlie, his face blackened with soot, riding toward her. "Miss Willow, boss sent me to find you. Make sure you got out safe." "Yates, is he fighting the fire at the edge of town? Lost some pasture land, but the house and barns are safe." Charlie dismounted stiffly. "He's worried sick about you, made me promise to see you safely to the river." Relief flooded through Willow, followed immediately by a clarity she hadn't expected. In that moment of fear of not knowing if Yates was safe, she realized the truth she'd been avoiding. She loved him. Deeply, irrevocably. "I need to see him," she said firmly. Charlie shook his head. "No, madam, too dangerous. Boss would have my hide if I let you anywhere near that fire." "Then tell me where he is. Please, Charlie." The old cowboy studied her face, then sighed. "North edge of town, by the Henderson place. But Miss Willow, it's no place for a lady." Willow was already moving, grabbing a bucket from a nearby well. "I'm not just a lady, Charlie. I'm a woman who loves a man who's in danger." The words, spoken aloud for the first time, gave her courage. Ignoring Charlie's protests, she made her way through the chaotic streets toward the northern edge of town. The scene that greeted her was apocalyptic. The sky was dark with smoke, and the air burned her lungs. Men formed a line passing buckets of water, while others beat at flames with wet blankets. In the distance, the fire raged across the dry grassland, a wall of orange and red devouring everything in its path. And there, in the midst of it all, directing men and working alongside them, was Yates. His face was black with soot, his shirt torn and singed, but he moved with purpose and authority. Willow joined the bucket line without hesitation, passing water alongside the other women who had refused evacuation. For hours they worked, as the sun set and the fire cast an eerie glow over the town. Gradually, the fire breaks and the men's efforts began to turn the tide. The wind shifted, driving the flames away from town, and by midnight the immediate danger had passed. Exhausted, covered in soot and sweat, Willow sat on the steps of the church, watching as men continued to monitor for flare-ups. She hadn't spoken to Yates, yet he was still coordinating efforts with the sheriff, but she had seen him glance her way several times, his expression a mixture of worry and pride. Finally, as dawn began to lighten the smoky sky, he made his way to her. Without a word, he sat beside her on the steps, his shoulders slumping with fatigue. "You should have gone to the river with the others," he said, his voice hoarse from smoke. "I couldn't leave," Willow replied simply, "not knowing you were here." He turned to look at her, his face streaked with soot, his eyes red-rimmed but intensely blue against the darkness. "Why?" Willow took a deep breath. "Because I love you." The words hung between them for a long moment, then Yates reached for her, pulling her into his arms with a groan of relief. "Say it again," he whispered against her hair. "I love you, Yates Donovan." He drew back just enough to look into her eyes, his hands framing her face. "I've been waiting to hear those words since the night of that dance. I'm sorry it took me so long, don't be." "Some things are worth waiting for." He leaned in, kissing her with a tenderness that belied his exhaustion. "Marry me, Willow, be my wife, my partner, let me love you for the rest of our lives." Tears streaked clean paths through the soot on Willow's face. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, I'll marry you." 3 weeks later, on a perfect August morning, Willow O'Connor stood in the back room of the church, adjusting the simple white dress she had made for herself. The bodice was adorned with delicate beadwork, similar to designs she had created for countless other brides, but with a pattern of wildflowers that matched the silver brooch pinned at her throat. Mrs. Henderson fussed with Willow's veil, tears in her eyes. "You look beautiful, my dear." "Absolutely radiant." Willow smiled, feeling oddly calm. The fire had changed everything, burning away her fears along with the dried grass. In its aftermath, as the town rebuilt and the land began to recover, she and Yates had grown even closer. They had faced danger together and emerged stronger for it. "It's time," Mrs. Henderson said, hearing the music begin. "Are you ready?" Willow nodded, taking a deep breath. "More than ready." The church was packed with townsfolk, all eager to witness the union of the reclusive seamstress and the rancher who had helped save their town from destruction. As Willow walked down the aisle alone, her eyes locked on Yates standing tall and handsome at the altar, she felt none of the self-consciousness that had once plagued her. Yates watched her approach, his face alight with love and pride. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, squeezing gently. "You're not hiding in the shadows anymore," he whispered as the minister began to speak. "No," Willow replied softly. "Thanks to you, I've found the light." Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises of love, fidelity, and partnership that brought tears to many eyes in the congregation. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Yates kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart swell. The celebration afterward was joyous, with dancing and feasting that lasted well into the evening. As the sun began to set, Yates led his bride to the waiting buggy, decorated with ribbons and wildflowers. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Donovan?" he asked, helping her up. Willow looked back at the town where she had hidden herself away for so many years, then turned to her husband with a smile. "Home with you, always." As they drove toward their ranch, their home, Willow leaned against Yates's shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible. She had hidden in the shadows at that fateful dance, afraid to step into the light. But Yates had seen her anyway, had chosen her from the darkness, and in doing so had given her the greatest gift of all, the courage to love again. The sun set behind them as they traveled toward their future, casting long shadows across the recovering land. But this time, Willow O'Connor Donovan wasn't hiding in the shadows. She was embracing the light, hand in hand with the man who had helped her find her way out of the darkness. And as stars began to appear in the twilight sky, Willow knew with absolute certainty that some things truly were worth the wait. Love, especially when it came in the form of a cowboy willing to step forward and choose the bride hidden in the shadows.